Chapter 1. A most peculiar arrival. It was a dreary November evening when the curious affair of the blood-stained music box first came to our attention. London had been enshrouded in a dense fog for 3 days, the kind that seeps into one's bones, and renders the gaslit streets into nothing more than hazy suggestions of their former selves. I had been sitting by the fire in our lodgings at 221B Baker Street, reviewing my notes on Holmes's recent solution to the Blackheath poisonings, while my friend engaged in one of his chemical experiments at the table by the window. The mantel clock had just struck 8 when we heard the urgent peal of our doorbell, followed by hurried footsteps upon the 17 steps that led to our quarters. Holmes glanced up from his test tubes, his keen eyes suddenly alert. "A client, Watson," he remarked, setting aside his equipment. "A young woman, I should say, in considerable distress." Before I could inquire how he had reached such a conclusion, Mrs. Hudson knocked and ushered in our visitor. She was indeed a young woman, perhaps 25, dressed in the height of fashion, though her garments were spattered with mud. Her face, which might have been pretty under ordinary circumstances, was pale and drawn, her eyes wide with what I recognized at once as terror. "Mr. Holmes," she gasped, clutching at the doorframe for support. "You must help me. I fear I may be accused of a murder I did not commit." Holmes rose smoothly to his feet, guiding our visitor to the armchair opposite mine. "Pray compose yourself, Miss Harrington," she supplied. "Miss Eleanor Harrington of Cavendish Square." "Miss Harrington," Holmes continued, "you are safe here. Take a moment to collect your thoughts, and then tell us exactly what has occurred. Watson, perhaps some brandy for our guest?" I poured a small measure of spirits, which the young woman accepted with trembling hands. After a sip, some color returned to her cheeks, and she appeared more able to speak coherently. "Mr. Holmes, my uncle, Sir Richard Harrington, was found dead in his study this evening. The police have already been summoned, and though they have not said as much, I believe they suspect me of the crime." "And why should they harbor such suspicions?" Holmes asked, settling into his chair and steepling his fingers beneath his chin, a posture I had come to associate with his most intense concentration. "Because," Miss Harrington replied, her voice barely above a whisper, "the weapon, a letter opener from his desk, bears my fingerprints, and I was heard quarreling with him just hours before his death regarding my inheritance." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "I see, and yet you claim innocence." "I am innocent, Mr. Holmes. Yes, we argued, and yes, I handled that letter opener yesterday, when I was in his study posting correspondence. But I did not kill him." "Tell me about your uncle," Holmes said. "Who stands to benefit from his death?" Miss Harrington took another fortifying sip of brandy. Uncle Richard was a difficult man, stern, exacting, and secretive. He made his fortune in the colonial service in India and returned to England 10 years ago. I am his only living relative, and he had promised to provide for me in his will. The quarrel today was because he threatened to change it. "And why would he do such a thing?" I inquired. "Because I refused the marriage he had arranged for me with Lord Harcourt, a business associate of his." Uncle Richard was furious. He said I was ungrateful and that I would regret my decision. A tear slipped down her cheek. "But I could never marry a man I do not love, especially one with Lord Harcourt's reputation." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "What can you tell us about the scene of the crime?" Uncle Richard was found at his desk, stabbed through the heart with his own letter opener. The study was in disarray, as though there had been a struggle, and there was a music box on the desk beside him. It was open, as if it had been playing, and there was blood spattered across its surface. At this, Holmes's eyebrows rose fractionally, a subtle gesture I had learned to recognize as an indication of his interest being piqued. "A music box? Was this item known to belong to your uncle?" Miss Harrington shook her head. "I had never seen it before. It's an ornate thing, crafted from dark wood with mother-of-pearl inlays. Oriental in design, I believe. When Inspector Lestrade arrived, he seemed quite fixated on it. "Ah, Lestrade is handling the case," Holmes murmured. "That may prove advantageous. Please continue, Miss Harrington. There is little more to tell. I discovered the body when I went to make peace with my uncle before dinner. I immediately summoned help, and the police arrived shortly thereafter. Inspector Lestrade questioned me at length about my relationship with Uncle Richard, and about our argument. He was particularly interested in the music box, and whether I had ever seen my uncle with it before. And the letter opener, you say you handled it yesterday? Yes, I used it to open some correspondence. I often helped Uncle Richard with such matters. Holmes rose and began to pace the room, his hands clasped behind his back. Miss Harrington, was anything taken from the study? Any papers or valuables missing? She frowned in concentration. Not that I could discern, though I was not in a state to make a thorough inventory. Uncle Richard kept important documents in a safe behind a painting of the Hindu goddess Kali, a souvenir from his time in India. The painting appeared undisturbed, so I assumed the safe was not tampered with. And what of your uncle's other business associates? Was Lord Harcourt his only connection of significance? Oh no, Uncle Richard had many business dealings. There was Mr. Fitzroy, his solicitor, Mr. Blackwood, who managed some investments in railway stocks, and Colonel Moran, with whom he often played cards at his club. There were others as well, though he rarely discussed his affairs with me. At the mention of Colonel Moran, I noticed a fleeting shadow cross Holmes's features. Colonel Sebastian Moran was known to us as a dangerous man with connections to the criminal underworld, though he maintained a veneer of respectability in certain social circles. Miss Harrington, Holmes said, coming to a halt before her. I shall take your case. Watson and I will visit the scene at the earliest opportunity. For now, where are you staying? I was to return to my uncle's house, but— No, Holmes interjected firmly. That would be most unwise. Watson, would you be so kind as to escort Miss Harrington to the Northumberland Hotel? She should be safe there for the night under an assumed name. I nodded my agreement, and Miss Harrington's relief was palpable. Mr. Holmes, how can I thank you? I have brought some money. Holmes waved away her offer. We shall discuss such matters later. For now, I require one thing from you: the exact address of your uncle's residence and a letter of introduction to facilitate our investigation. While Miss Harrington wrote out the requested letter at Holmes's desk, my friend drew me aside. Watson, this case presents several points of interest already. The blood-stained music box, the connection to India, and the mention of Colonel Moran. These are not insignificant details. You suspect Moran's involvement? I suspect nothing as yet, Holmes replied, though his eyes glinted with that familiar spark of intellectual excitement. But I recall a case in my files involving a similar music box associated with a theft in Bombay some 15 years ago. It may be mere coincidence, but in my experience, the universe is rarely so lazy. Once Miss Harrington had completed her letter, I donned my coat and prepared to escort her to the hotel. Before we departed, Holmes addressed her once more. Miss Harrington, did your uncle ever speak of any threats against his person? Any enemies from his time in India? She hesitated. He did mention once, after too much port at dinner, that he had cheated death in the land of Kali, and that his past might someday catch up with him. I thought it merely the rambling of an old man, but perhaps indeed, Holmes murmured. Rest assured, we shall get to the bottom of this matter. Watson will ensure your safety tonight, and tomorrow we begin our investigation in earnest. As I led the distressed young woman out into the foggy London night, I glanced back to see Holmes already pulling volumes from his extensive index of past crimes, his pipe lit, and a cloud of tobacco smoke encircling his head like a nimbus. I knew that, look well, Sherlock Holmes was on the hunt, and the game was afoot. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime. The following morning dawned with no improvement to London's dismal weather. The fog had, if anything, grown thicker overnight, transforming the familiar streets into an otherworldly landscape of muted sounds and ghostly silhouettes. Holmes and I departed Baker Street shortly after breakfast, having received word that Inspector Lestrade would meet us at Sir Richard Harrington's residence in Cavendish Square. "I took the liberty of telegraphing Lestrade before dawn," Holmes explained as our hansom cab rattled through the shrouded city. "While he may lack imagination, his cooperation will prove valuable. Besides, I prefer to examine the scene with official sanction rather than through more unorthodox means." I smiled at this, recalling several occasions when Holmes had employed less conventional methods to gain access to crime scenes. "What are your initial thoughts on the case, Holmes?" "It would be a capital mistake to theorize before we have data, Watson. But I confess, the mention of Colonel Moran troubles me. The man is dangerous, perhaps the most dangerous in London after the departure of his former employer." I knew he was referring to Professor Moriarty, the notorious criminal mastermind whose organization Holmes had dismantled several years prior at great personal cost. Sir Richard's residence proved to be an imposing townhouse, its Portland stone facade speaking of considerable wealth. Inspector Lestrade awaited us on the steps, his collar turned up against the damp chill. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he greeted us with a nod. "I must say I'm surprised to find you involved so quickly. The body's barely cold. Miss Harrington saw it." "My counsel last evening," Holmes replied. "She fears she may be unjustly accused of her uncle's murder." Lestrade's thin lips twisted into a wry smile. "As they always do. Well, you're welcome to look around, though I warn you, it's a straightforward case. Family quarrel over money, clear evidence of the niece's presence, and a convenient weapon with her fingerprints upon it. And yet you've made no arrest," Holmes observed as we followed Lestrade into the house. Gathering the final pieces of evidence, the inspector replied defensively, "We'll have her in custody by this afternoon, I expect." The interior of the house was as opulent as its exterior suggested. Oriental carpets covered polished floors, and the walls were adorned with a curious mixture of English landscapes and Indian artifacts, evidence of Sir Richard's colonial past. A door-faced butler led us through to the study where the murder had occurred. The room remained much as it had been discovered, save for the removal of the body. A massive mahogany desk dominated the space, its surface disordered with papers. A dark stain on the carpet marked where Sir Richard had fallen after being stabbed. Behind the desk hung the painting Miss Harrington had mentioned, a garish depiction of the goddess Kali, her multiple arms wielding weapons, her tongue protruding, and her necklace made of skulls. "Charming decoration," I remarked. "A souvenir of Sir Richard's time in India," Lestrade explained. According to the servants, he was quite proud of it, though it gave most visitors a fright. Holmes paid little attention to our exchange. He moved about the room with careful precision, his keen eyes scanning every detail. He examined the bloodstain, the desk, and the overturned chair, occasionally dropping to his knees to inspect the carpet with his magnifying glass. "And the music box?" he inquired without looking up. Lestrade gestured to an evidence case. "We've taken it as evidence. Unusual item, especially with the blood spatter. When found, it was open and apparently had been playing." Holmes straightened and approached the case, where an ornate wooden box lay, its lid open. The intricate mother-of-pearl inlays formed a pattern of lotus flowers and peacocks, but these delicate designs were now partially obscured by dark blood stains. "May I?" Holmes asked, already donning a pair of gloves. Lestrade hesitated but nodded his assent. Holmes carefully lifted the music box, examining it from all angles before peering at its mechanism. "Interesting," he murmured. "This is of Indian craftsmanship, likely from Bombay, circa 1870. High-quality work, but not what one would call a common export. The bloodstains suggest it was open and on the desk when Sir Richard was stabbed. Tell me, Lestrade, what do you make of these marks?" On the underside? The inspector leaned closer. Scratches? Perhaps it was dropped? Perhaps, Holmes replied, though his tone suggested he thought otherwise. And what of Sir Richard's safe? Has it been examined? Safe? Lestrade looked confused. Behind the painting of Cayley, I offered, recalling Miss Harrington's words. Lestrade's expression darkened. Miss Harrington mentioned no safe to us. He strode to the painting and swung it outward on concealed hinges, revealing a wall safe with a dial lock. It appears undisturbed, but we'll need to open it. I suggest you do so with the utmost care, Holmes advised. Now, if you would be so kind as to tell us who discovered the body. The butler, Wilkins, responded to Miss Harrington's screams. He found her standing over the body, allegedly in shock. He then summoned the footman to fetch the police, while the housekeeper attended to Miss Harrington. Holmes nodded. I should like to interview the household staff, particularly this Wilkins, and I would appreciate a list of Sir Richard's recent visitors, Lestrade agreed, though with clear reluctance, and departed to arrange these interviews. Once alone with me, Holmes returned to his examination of the room with renewed vigor. Watson, what do you observe about this scene? I surveyed the room carefully. Signs of a struggle, certainly. The papers strewn about, the overturned chair. The blood pattern suggests Sir Richard was sitting at his desk when stabbed. He fell forward, then to the floor. The letter opener must have been convenient at hand. Good, Watson, but what else? What stands out as inconsistent? I frowned, looking more closely. Well, the music box seems an odd addition. If it doesn't belong to Sir Richard, how did it come to be here? And why would it be playing at the time of his death? Holmes smiled approvingly. Precisely. And notice, the distance from the desk to the door, approximately 15 feet. Miss Harrington claims she discovered the body and immediately called for help. Yet the butler found her standing over the corpse. Why would she approach the body rather than summon aid from the doorway? Perhaps shock compelled her to confirm her uncle was truly dead. Perhaps, Holmes conceded. But there is more to this case than a simple family dispute turned violent. The music box is the key, Watson. It was left here deliberately. A message of sorts. And I intend to decipher its meaning. Chapter 3. Witnesses and Whispers. The butler, Wilkins, proved to be a man of impressive stature and equally impressive composure. Despite the grim circumstances, his demeanor remained impeccably professional as Holmes questioned him in the morning. Room, a pleasant chamber that offered a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of Sir Richard's study. I have served Sir Richard for 8 years, sir, ever since his return from India, Wilkins stated, standing rigidly with his hands clasped behind his back. He was a demanding employer but fair in his way. And your impressions of the relationship between Sir Richard and his niece? Holmes inquired, lounging in an armchair with deceptive casualness. Wilkins hesitated, his impassive face betraying the faintest flicker of discomfort. It would not be my place to comment on family matters. Mr. Holmes, I assure you your discretion is noted, but your observations may prove vital in preventing an injustice. Holmes pressed gently. The butler cleared his throat. Their relationship was complex, sir. Miss Eleanor came to live with Sir Richard 3 years ago after the passing of her parents. Sir Richard was not accustomed to female companionship, having lived as a bachelor for most of his life. There were adjustments required on both sides. And the quarrel yesterday? I heard raised voices from the study in the afternoon, sir. It is not my habit to eavesdrop, but Sir Richard's tone was unusually severe. I gathered it concerned Miss Eleanor's refusal of Lord Harcourt's proposal. Did you observe anything unusual about Sir Richard's behavior in recent days? Holmes continued. Any visitors or correspondence that seemed to disturb him? At this, Wilkins's stoic facade cracked slightly. Now that you mention it, sir, there was a letter that arrived 3 days ago. It bore a foreign stamp. Indian, I believe." Sir Richard turned quite pale upon reading it, and immediately locked himself in his study for several hours. When he emerged, he instructed me to double-check all the doors and windows before retiring that night. Holmes leaned forward, his interest visibly piqued. "And this letter? Do you know what became of it?" "Sir Richard burned it in the fireplace, sir. I saw the ashes when I brought his evening brandy." "I see. One final question, Wilkins. The music box found on Sir Richard's desk. Had you seen it before yesterday?" The butler's brow furrowed. "Never, sir. Sir Richard possessed several Indian curios, but no music box to my knowledge. In fact, I was quite surprised to see it there. Sir Richard was not fond of music. He considered it a frivolous distraction. After interviewing the housekeeper and the footman, neither of whom provided significant new information, Holmes suggested we speak with Miss Harrington again. Lestrade reluctantly agreed to postpone her arrest until we had done so, though his impatience was evident. We found Eleanor Harrington in the drawing-room, dressed in morning black, her pale features composed, though strain showed around her eyes. She rose when we entered, her gaze immediately seeking Holmes. "Have you discovered anything, Mr. Holmes?" "Inspector Lestrade seems determined to arrest me by day's end." "We are making progress, Miss Harrington," Holmes assured her. "But I require more information about your uncle. Were you aware of a letter he received from India 3 days ago?" She shook her head. "Uncle Richard did not share his correspondence with me. Was it important?" "Potentially. Now, can you tell me more about Lord Harcourt and his connection to your uncle?" Miss Harrington's expression darkened. "Lord Harcourt and my uncle served together in India. They maintained business interests there even after returning to England, importing spices and textiles primarily. Lord Harcourt is nearly 30 years my senior and has buried 2 wives already. I could not—" She broke off, composing herself. "Uncle Richard insisted the match would secure my future, but I suspect his motives were more complex." "How so?" I inquired. "Lord Harcourt holds significant influence in certain government circles. Uncle Richard once mentioned that such connections could prove valuable should old ghosts from India resurface. I never understood what he meant by that." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "And Colonel Moran? What was the nature of his relationship with your uncle?" At the mention of Moran, Miss Harrington's discomfort visibly increased. "They met weekly at my uncle's club for cards. I gathered they also knew each other in India, though in what capacity I cannot say. Colonel Moran dined here occasionally, the last time being a fortnight ago. Their conversation that evening became quite heated after I retired, according to Wilkins." "One last question, Miss Harrington. Did your uncle possess any items of particular value? Jewelry, perhaps, or documents?" She considered this. "He wore a gold pocket watch with an inscription in Sanskrit, and there was a small ivory figurine he kept on his person at all times, a representation of Ganesha, the elephant-headed deity. He was quite superstitious about it, claiming it had saved his life in Bombay during some unrest. Beyond that, I know he kept important papers in his safe, though I was never permitted to see them." After concluding our interview with Miss Harrington, Holmes requested a moment alone with me in the garden, a small walled enclosure at the rear of the house where we could speak without being overheard. "What do you make of it all, Watson?" he asked, lighting his pipe despite the dampness of the air. "It seems increasingly likely that Sir Richard's murder is connected to his past in India," I replied. "The mysterious letter, the music box of Indian craftsmanship, his comment about old ghosts and cheating death in the land of Kali. These suggest a reckoning with his colonial history." "Precisely," Holmes agreed. "And note the missing items. The gold watch and the ivory figurine were not among Sir Richard's effects according to Lestrade's inventory. Our killer took them. But why? They may be valuable, but I suspect their significance extends beyond mere monetary worth. Could Colonel Moran be involved? His connection to Moriarty and his history with Sir Richard cannot be coincidental. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Moran is certainly a person of interest. A ruthless man with expert knowledge of India and a talent for violence. But we must not jump to conclusions. I require more data. He checked his watch. We should return to Baker Street. I need to consult my monograph on the criminal organizations of Bombay, and there are telegrams to be sent. As we prepared to depart, Lestrade intercepted us in the hall. "The locksmith has opened the safe," he announced. "You'll want to see this, Mr. Holmes." He led us back to the study, where the open safe revealed a surprisingly sparse collections of documents, far fewer than one would expect for a man of Sir Richard's business interests. Most of the papers appear to be land deeds and investment records, Lestrade explained. "But there's this as well." He handed Holmes a small leather-bound journal. My friend opened it carefully, revealing pages filled with a cramped, meticulous hand. "Sir Richard's personal diary," Holmes murmured. "And look here, Watson, the final entry, dated the day before his death." I peered over his shoulder to read the chilling words. "It has found me at last. The lotus plays its song again, and Kaylee comes to collect her due. I fear Eleanor may suffer for my sins. God forgive me for what I have done." Chapter 4. The Lotus Society. Back at Baker Street, Holmes wasted no time immersing himself in research. He had borrowed Sir Richard's diary with Lestrade's reluctant permission, and now sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers, reference books on India, and his own extensive files of criminal cases. "Watson," he called, not looking up from the diary, "be so kind as to locate my monograph on secret societies of the Orient. I believe it's bound in red morocco. Leather?" I located the volume among the organized chaos of Holmes's shelves and handed it to him. "Have you found something significant in Sir Richard's writings?" "Several items of interest," Holmes replied, flipping rapidly through the monograph. "Sir Richard's journal is most illuminating, though deliberately vague on certain points. He makes repeated references to the Lotus and to a blood debt dating back to 1879 in Bombay. The same period as the music box, I observed. Precisely." Holmes found the page he sought and traced his finger down it. "Ah, here we are. The Lotus Society. A secret fraternity with origins in Bombay, comprising primarily English colonials and wealthy Indian merchants. Ostensibly formed as a social and business networking group, rumors persisted of darker activities including opium trafficking, bribery of officials, and possible involvement in several unsolved murders. The society reportedly used a lotus symbol on a distinctive music box as their recognition signal. I sank into my armchair, the implications becoming clear. So Sir Richard was a member of this Lotus Society? All evidence points to it. And, not merely a member, I suspect he held significant influence within it. Holmes turned several pages in the diary. Listen to this entry from 6 months ago. H grows increasingly troublesome. His gambling debts mount, and he pressures me to use society connections to cover his losses. He forgets that those days are behind us, that we agreed to bury the past when we returned to England. Monsieur counsels caution, but his loyalty has always been questionable. H must be Lord Harcourt, I reasoned, and Monsieur is likely Colonel Moran. Indeed, and this entry from 2 months ago is even more telling. Rumors from Bombay. The old temple has been excavated, and with it, secrets best left buried. The collector claims to have found relics from the incident. If true, none of us are safe. Knock at our door interrupted Holmes's reading. It was a telegram messenger boy. Holmes tore open the yellow envelope and scanned its contents, his expression darkening. "From my agent in Whitehall," he explained. "It seems Lord Harcourt departed for Paris yesterday morning, mere hours after Sir Richard's murder. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Do you suspect him of the murder? He certainly warrants closer examination. And here's another telegram." Holmes opened a second message that had arrived with the first. Ah, as I suspected. Colonel Moran was observed entering his club at 9 o'clock on the night of the murder, and did not leave until well after midnight, according to my informants in the irregulars. Multiple witnesses can attest to his presence there. So Moran has an alibi, I noted. That would seem to eliminate him as the direct perpetrator. Perhaps, Holmes replied, though his tone suggested skepticism. Moran is not above employing others to do his dirty work, but let us follow where the evidence leads. Holmes rose and began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back, a habit when deep in thought. We are dealing with events set in motion, decades ago in India. Sir Richard, Lord Harcourt, and Colonel Moran were all members of this Lotus Society. Something occurred in 1879 involving a temple, something that Sir Richard characterized as an incident, which created a blood debt. And now someone has come to collect, I finished. Precisely. Holmes paused by the window, gazing down at the gaslit street below. The music box was deliberately placed at the scene, a calling card of sorts, meant to signify that the murder was an act of vengeance by or on behalf of the Lotus Society. But who would seek such vengeance, after all? These years, and why now? Chapter 4. The Lotus Society. Back at Baker Street, Holmes wasted no time immersing himself in research. He had borrowed Sir Richard's diary with Lestrade's reluctant permission, and now sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by stacks of old newspapers, reference books on India, and his own extensive files of criminal cases. "Watson," he called, not looking up from the diary, "be so kind as to locate my monograph on secret societies of the Orient. I believe it's bound in red morocco, leather." I located the volume among the organized chaos of Holmes's shelves and handed it to him. "Have you found something significant in Sir Richard's writings?" "Several items of interest," Holmes replied, flipping rapidly through the monograph. "Sir Richard's journal is most illuminating, though deliberately vague on certain points. He makes repeated references to the Lotus and to a blood debt dating back to 1879 in Bombay. The same period as the music box, I observed. Precisely. Holmes found the page he sought and traced his finger down it. Ah, here we are. The Lotus Society, a secret fraternity with origins in Bombay, comprising primarily English colonials and wealthy Indian merchants. Ostensibly formed as a social and business networking group, rumors persisted of darker activities including opium trafficking, bribery of officials, and possible involvement in several unsolved murders. The society reportedly used a lotus symbol on a distinctive music box as their recognition signal. I sank into my armchair, the implications becoming clear. So Sir Richard was a member of this Lotus Society? All evidence points to it. And, not merely a member, I suspect he held significant influence within it. Holmes turned several pages in the diary. Listen to this entry from 6 months ago. H grows increasingly troublesome. His gambling debts mount, and he pressures me to use society connections to cover his losses. He forgets that those days are behind us, that we agreed to bury the past when we returned to England. Monsieur counsels caution, but his loyalty has always been questionable. Ch must be Lord Harcourt, I reasoned, and Msu is likely Colonel Moran. Indeed, and this entry from 2 months ago is even more telling. Rumors from Bombay. The old temple has been excavated, and with it, secrets best left buried. The collector claims to have found relics from the incident. If true, none of us are safe. Knock at our door interrupted Holmes's reading. It was a telegram messenger boy. Holmes tore open the yellow envelope and scanned its contents, his expression darkening. "From my agent in Whitehall," he explained. "It seems Lord Harcourt departed for Paris yesterday morning, mere hours after Sir Richard's murder. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Do you suspect him of the murder? He certainly warrants closer examination. And here's another telegram. Holmes opened a second message that had arrived with the first. Ah, as I suspected. Colonel Moran was observed entering his club at 9 o'clock on the night of the murder, and did not leave until well after midnight, according to my informants in the irregulars. Multiple witnesses can attest to his presence there. So Moran has an alibi, I noted. That would seem to eliminate him as the direct perpetrator. Perhaps, Holmes replied, though his tone suggested skepticism. Moran is not above employing others to do his dirty work, but let us follow where the evidence leads. Holmes rose and began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back, a habit when deep in thought. We are dealing with events set in motion, decades ago in India. Sir Richard, Lord Harcourt, and Colonel Moran were all members of this Lotus Society. Something occurred in 1879 involving a temple, something that Sir Richard characterized as an incident, which created a blood debt. And now someone has come to collect, I finished. Precisely. Holmes paused by the window, gazing down at the gaslit street below. The music box was deliberately placed at the scene, a calling card of sorts, meant to signify that the murder was an act of vengeance by or on behalf of the Lotus Society. But who would seek such vengeance after all? These years, and why now? Before Holmes could answer, we heard rapid footsteps on the stairs, followed by an urgent rapping at our door. It was Inspector Lestrade, his face flushed and his breathing labored. Mr. Holmes, there's been another murder. Lord Harcourt has been found dead in his private train compartment en route to Dover. Holmes' eyes gleamed with that peculiar light I had come to associate with the thrill of the chase. Details, Lestrade. Quickly. Stabbed through the heart, just like Sir Richard. And there was a music box found beside him, identical to the one from Cavendish Square, also splattered with blood. And Miss Harrington? Holmes asked sharply. Still at her hotel under police surveillance? She couldn't possibly be responsible for this murder. Indeed. Holmes grabbed his coat and hat. This changes matters considerably. When does the next train leave for Dover? In 45 minutes from Victoria Station, Lestrade replied. Then we have no time to lose. Watson, bring your revolver. Lestrade, can you arrange for us to examine the crime scene undisturbed? As we hurried into a hansom cab, I noticed Holmes had brought Sir Richard's diary and the reference book on secret societies. You believe the murders are the work of this Lotus Society? Or someone using their symbolism very deliberately, Holmes replied. The pattern is clear. First Sir Richard, now Lord Harcourt, which suggests Colonel Moran may be next. Or perhaps he is orchestrating these events. The journey to Dover was tense with anticipation. Holmes spent the time studying Sir Richard's diary, occasionally making notes in his pocket memorandum book. I found myself constantly alert, scanning our fellow passengers with suspicion, my hand never far from the revolver in my pocket. Lord Harcourt's body had been removed to a private room at the Dover station when we arrived. The police surgeon was just completing his examination as we entered. Cause of death identical to Sir Richard Harrington, he informed us. Single stab wound to the heart with a narrow blade. Death would have been nearly instantaneous. The compartment where the murder occurred had been sealed off. Inside, Holmes immediately set to work, examining every inch of the space with his customary thoroughness. The bloodstains on the plush seat told their own grim story, but it was the music box on the small table that commanded our attention. Identical in design to the one from Sir Richard's study, this box too had been left, open, its mechanism silent now. Holmes carefully examined it with his magnifying glass. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "The blood spatter pattern indicates the box was opened after Lord Harcourt was stabbed, not before. Our killer deliberately activated it post-mortem. A ritual, of sorts. Look here," Lestrade called from where he was examining the floor beneath the window. A cufflink with an unusual design. Holmes took the item and studied it. A lotus flower set in gold. Not Lord Harcourt's, his remain on his cuffs. This belongs to our killer, who clearly lost it in the struggle. "A careless mistake," I remarked. "Perhaps," Holmes replied, though his expression was troubled. "Or perhaps intentionally left as another message. The workmanship is distinctly Indian." As Holmes continued his examination, I noticed a folded newspaper that had fallen partially under the seat. Retrieving it, I found it was a week-old copy of the Times with one article circled in red ink. "Bombay Temple Excavation Reveals Colonial-Era Massacre Site." "Holmes," I called, "you should see this." My friend's eyes scanned the article quickly. Just as I suspected, the incident alluded to in Sir Richard's diary was no mere financial scandal. It was a massacre, one that history had conveniently forgotten until this recent excavation uncovered the evidence. "And our killer is connected to these events?" Lestrade asked. "Without doubt," Holmes replied grimly. "We are dealing with a vendetta spanning continents and decades, and I fear there is more bloodshed to come unless we can identify and apprehend our culprit." "Colonel Moran," I suggested. "He remains a person of interest, certainly. But something about this case doesn't align with Moran's methods." Holmes pocketed the cufflink and newspaper. "I believe our next step is clear. We must speak with someone knowledgeable about the Bombay Temple Massacre of 1879. "And who might that be?" Lestrade inquired. Holmes' expression was grave as he replied, "Professor Harrington of Oxford University, Sir Richard's cousin, and the foremost British expert on colonial India. If anyone can illuminate the darkness of this old tragedy, it is he." Chapter 5. The Professor's Tale. Oxford. In November presented a somber aspect. Leaden skies hung over the ancient spires, and a persistent drizzle had driven most students and faculty indoors. Holmes and I traversed the rain-slicked cobblestones of Magdalen College's quadrangle, seeking the quarters of Professor James Harrington. We found him in his book-lined study, a stooped figure with a shock of white hair and wire-rimmed spectacles. Despite his advanced years, his mind remained sharp, his eyes alert and assessing as we introduced ourselves. "Sherlock Holmes," he mused, gesturing for us to take seats before his crackling fire. "I've followed your cases with interest, sir, though I never imagined you would darken my door concerning my cousin Richard." He removed his spectacles and polished them with a handkerchief. "A terrible business. The newspapers say his niece is suspected." "We have reason to believe Miss Eleanor Harrington is innocent," Holmes replied. "Recent developments suggest the murder is connected to events in Bombay in 1879, specifically an incident involving a temple and an organization known as the Lotus Society." The professor's hand froze mid-polish. For a moment his scholarly composure cracked, revealing something like fear beneath. He replaced his spectacles with deliberate care. "I see," he said quietly. "And what makes you connect Richard's death to those unfortunate events?" Holmes briefly outlined our discoveries: the blood-stained music boxes, Sir Richard's diary entries, Lord Harcourt's murder, and the newspaper article about the temple excavation. As he spoke, the professor's complexion grew increasingly pallid. "I had hoped those ghosts would remain buried," he said when Holmes concluded. "But I suppose history has a way of resurfacing, especially history written in blood." "You were in India during this period?" I asked. "Indeed, Dr. Watson. I was conducting research on Hindu religious practices for my doctoral thesis. Richard was stationed in Bombay with the colonial service. He introduced me to his circle, Harcourt, Moran, and several others who formed this Lotus Society, as they called it." "What was the true nature of this society?" Holmes inquired. Professor Harrington rose and crossed to a cabinet, from which he extracted a dusty bottle of brandy. He poured 3 generous measures before responding. "Officially, it was a social club for British colonials and wealthy Indians who had adopted English ways. In reality, it became a vehicle for corruption, exploitation, and worse." He handed us each a glass. Richard and his associates used their positions to amass considerable fortunes through dubious means, bribing officials, smuggling opium, manipulating local politics. And the temple incident? Holmes pressed. The professor took a long draught of brandy. The Temple of Kali in northern Bombay was rumored to house a magnificent treasure, ancient gold artifacts and gems of immense value. The temple priests refused access to foreigners, considering the site's sacred ground. "Let me guess," I interjected. "The Lotus Society decided to take the treasure by force." "Precisely, Dr. Watson." Under cover of night, Richard, Harcourt, Moran, and 3 others entered the temple armed with revolvers. They intended merely to intimidate the priests and take the treasure. But something went terribly wrong. "A massacre," Holmes said softly. The professor nodded, his face haunted. One of the priests resisted, and in the ensuing struggle Moran's pistol discharged, killing him. Panic ensued. By the time it ended, 15 priests and temple attendants lay dead. The Lotus Society members fled with whatever treasures they could carry. "And there were no repercussions?" I asked, appalled. The official report claimed the temple was a den of thuggy cultists who had attacked the British officials during a routine inspection. Colonial authorities were content to accept this version, particularly when generously bribed. The temple was sealed, the incident buried. He drained his glass. "I learned the truth from Richard himself during a night of drunken confession. He was haunted by it, though not enough to surrender his ill-gotten gains or confess publicly." Holmes leaned forward. "And now, 45 years later, someone connected to these events is exacting revenge." "So it would seem." The professor set down his empty glass. "But who? Most of the priests died that night. A few escaped, but they would be elderly now if still alive. Perhaps descendants seeking justice for their ancestors?" I suggested. "Possible," Holmes acknowledged. "The music boxes, what significance did they hold for the Lotus Society?" Professor Harrington smiled thinly. "They were recognition tokens. Each member received one upon initiation. When opened in the presence of another member, it would play a distinctive melody, their secret signal." "Were there exactly 7 such boxes made?" Holmes asked. "Yes, 1 for each founding member. Richard, Harcourt, Moran, William Blackwood, Henry Fitzroy, Major James Stilwell, and Dr. Thomas Green. All were present at the temple that night except for Green, who stayed behind to provide alibis if needed." Holmes's eyes narrowed at this information. "And the current whereabouts of these individuals?" "Blackwood and Fitzroy have been dead for years. Natural causes, as I understand it. Stilwell died in Afghanistan in the Second Anglo-Afghan War. Green returned to London and established a successful practice in Harley Street, though he must be well into his 70s now if still alive. That leaves only Colonel Moran among the living participants," I observed. "So it would appear," the professor agreed. "Though I've had no contact with any of these men in decades. I severed ties with Richard after learning of the massacre." Holmes withdrew the lotus cufflink found at the scene of Lord Harcourt's murder and showed it to Professor Harrington. "Do you recognize this design?" The old man's hands trembled as he took the cufflink. "It is similar to the insignia of the Lotus Society. Certainly, though I never saw their actual emblem. It appears to be of recent manufacture, however, not a relic from 45 years ago." "One final question, Professor," Holmes said, retrieving the cufflink. "The treasure taken from the temple, what became of it?" "Divided among the participants, I believe. Richard's share funded his return to England and his various business ventures here. But there was one item that caused particular distress among the temple authorities. A golden statue of Kali herself, said to be over 1,000 years old and imbued with mystical properties. According to legend, those who defiled it would face the goddess's wrath. As if on cue, a crash of thunder punctuated his words, making us all start slightly. "Superstition," Holmes murmured. though his expression remained thoughtful, yet powerful enough to inspire fear, and perhaps revenge, even decades later. As we prepared to depart, the professor hesitated, then withdrew a faded photograph from his desk drawer. "This may be of use to you, Mr. Holmes. It shows the original, members of the Lotus Society, taken in Bombay in 1878. The sepia image showed 7 men in colonial white attire, standing before an ornate building. I recognized younger versions of Sir Richard and Lord Harcourt immediately. Colonel Moran stood at the center, his distinctive hawkish profile unmistakable even then. And this man on the far right, the professor added, is Dr. Thomas Green. The others are Blackwood, Fitzroy, and Stillwell." Holmes pocketed the photograph with a nod of thanks. "You have been most helpful, Professor Harrington. I advise caution in the coming days. Though you were not directly involved in the temple incident, your connection to Sir Richard may place you at risk." The professor's smile was resigned. "At my age, Mr. Holmes, death holds less terror than it once did. But I shall take reasonable precautions." As our train rattled back toward London through the gathering dusk, Holmes sat in uncharacteristic silence, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. The rhythm of the wheels seemed to beat out a somber cadence, like distant drums of judgment approaching ever closer. "We must warn Colonel Moran," I said finally, breaking the silence. "Whatever his past crimes, he may be the next target." "Indeed," Holmes agreed, his gaze still focused on some distant point. "Yet I cannot shake the feeling that we are missing something crucial. This case has too many convenient patterns, almost as if our adversary wishes us to follow a specific trail. A trap of some kind? Perhaps." He withdrew the photograph and studied it once more. 7 men, Watson. 6 present at a massacre. 1 who remained behind. 2 now murdered with their own music boxes beside them. What message is our killer trying to convey? That justice has finally caught up with the Lotus Society, I ventured. "An eye for an eye." "Yes," Holmes murmured. "But whose eye? And wielded by whom?" He returned the photograph to his pocket. "Our next move is clear. We must locate Dr. Thomas Green and Colonel Moran without delay. The former may provide insights that the latter would be unwilling to share." Night had fallen by the time we reached London, the city cloaked in its perpetual November fog. I could not suppress a shiver as we disembarked, feeling as though invisible eyes watched our every move. The gaze of Kaylee herself, perhaps, guiding the hand of her earthly avenger. Chapter 6. The Doctor's Confession. Morning found us at 27 Harley Street, outside the residence and practice of Dr. Thomas Green. The brass plate on the door, tarnished with age, identified him as a specialist in tropical diseases, an appropriate field, given his history in India. Despite the early hour, lights burned behind the curtained windows. "It appears the doctor keeps unusual hours," I remarked as Holmes rapped sharply on the door. "Or perhaps he too is haunted by recent events," Holmes replied. A haggard-faced housemaid answered our knock, informing us that the doctor was indeed at home, but had been taken ill the previous evening. Nevertheless, upon hearing Holmes' name, Dr. Green agreed to receive us in his study. We found the elderly physician huddled in an armchair before a roaring fire, wrapped in a dressing gown despite the room's stifling heat. Time had not been kind to Thomas Green. The vigorous young man from the photograph had been replaced by a gaunt, trembling figure with rheumy eyes and liver-spotted hands. A half-empty whiskey decanter stood on the table beside him. "Mr. Holmes," he wheezed, not rising to greet us. "I wondered when you might appear at my door. You've come about Richard and Cedric, I presume? Terrible business." "You've heard of Lord Harcourt's murder, then," Holmes observed, settling into a chair opposite the doctor. "It was in this morning's papers." Green gestured to a folded Times, on a nearby table. "Stabbed, just like Richard. It doesn't require your famous deductive powers to see the pattern forming." "Indeed not," Holmes agreed. "Which is why we've come to warn you, Doctor. As one of the few surviving members of the Lotus Society, you may be in considerable danger." Green's laugh was hollow, dissolving into a racking cough. "My dear sir, I have been in danger since the moment news of the temple excavation was published. Richard telephoned me in a panic the very day he received that cursed letter from Bombay." Holmes leaned forward. "What letter was this exactly?" "A missive written in Sanskrit, accompanied by a detailed account of our actions at the Temple of Kali in 1879. It promised retribution. Blood for blood, it said. Richard dismissed it as an attempt at blackmail, but I knew better." The old doctor refilled his glass with shaking hands. "The past has finally caught up with us, Mr. Holmes. Kali's vengeance, come at last." "You speak as if this is some supernatural punishment," I said. "Surely you don't believe—" "What I believe, Dr. Watson, is irrelevant. What I know is that I participated in a terrible act of violence 45 years ago, and now someone is methodically eliminating those responsible." He took a long swallow of whiskey. "One cannot outrun karma indefinitely." "Let us speak practically," Holmes interjected. "Your knowledge may help us prevent further bloodshed." The music boxes left. "With the bodies, they were recognition tokens for the society members, correct?" Green nodded. "Yes, crafted by a silversmith in Bombay who specialized in European mechanical novelties with Oriental designs. Each played the same tune, a Hindu devotional melody, though none of us recognized the irony at the time. And you each possessed one?" "Initially, yes, though I believe several were lost or discarded over the years. I sold mine decades ago when I fell on hard times after returning to England." Holmes withdrew the lotus cufflink and placed it on the table between them. "Do you recognize this?" Green recoiled visibly, his complexion turning ashen. "Where did you get that?" "It was found at the scene of Lord Harcourt's murder." "I take it you do recognize it." "It is similar to items commissioned by certain descendants of the temple priests. After the massacre, they formed their own society, a mirror image of ours, dedicated to preserving the memory of the atrocity and seeking justice." Green's voice had dropped to a near whisper. "They called themselves the Children of Kali. And you believe this group is responsible for the current murders?" I asked. "Who else? They swore a blood oath to avenge their slain ancestors. Richard received warnings from them over the years. We all did. But they remained shadows, rumors, until now." Holmes' expression remained skeptical. "A secret society of Indian avengers operating in the heart of London, dispatching their enemies with ritualistic precision. It seems rather theatrical, Doctor. The East has a flair for the theatrical, Mr. Holmes, and revenge is a dish best served cold, as they say." Green drained his glass. "Besides, there were not only Indian priests at the temple that night. There was an Englishwoman, a scholar of Hindu mysticism, who had been accepted into their inner circle. She died with the others, shot through the heart by Moran." This was new information. "An Englishwoman?" Holmes repeated. "What was her name?" "Elizabeth Marlowe. Brilliant woman, Oxford educated, fluent in Sanskrit and Hindi. She had gone native, as the colonial expression went, rejected Western ways and embraced Hinduism completely." Green's expression turned wistful. "She tried to stop us, to reason with us, called us thieves and desecrators. Moran silenced her first." "Did she have family in England?" Holmes pressed. "A daughter, I believe, who would have been a young girl at the time. The father was unknown, possibly one of the temple priests. I don't know what became of her after her mother's death." Holmes and I exchanged glances, both recognizing the significance of this revelation. A half-English daughter, raised with her mother's beliefs, and then orphaned by colonial violence. She would have powerful motives for revenge. "There is one more thing you should know, Mr. Holmes," Green continued, leaning forward conspiratorially. "The golden Kali statue we took from the temple, it wasn't merely valuable in monetary terms, According to temple lore, it contained a hidden compartment with a document of immense historical and religious significance. "What sort of document?" I inquired. "I never saw it myself." Richard took possession of the statue and whatever it contained. He was most secretive about it, even with his fellow society members. Green refilled his glass once more. Whatever it was, he believed it gave him leverage. Insurance, he called it. And this statue. "Where is it now?" Holmes asked. "Last I heard, Richard still had it, hidden somewhere in his house. He was superstitious about it, claimed it protected him despite the curse." Green's laugh was bitter. "Fat lot of good it did him in the end." As we prepared to depart, Holmes fixed the elderly doctor with a penetrating gaze. "I strongly advise you to leave London until this matter is resolved, Dr. Green. The countryside, perhaps, or the continent." Green shook, his head wearily. "What would be the point, Mr. Holmes? If these are indeed the children of Kali, they will find me wherever I go. Better to face one's fate with dignity." He gestured to his medical bag on a nearby table. "Besides, I have my own methods of defense, should they come for me." Outside on Harley Street, Holmes immediately hailed a cab. "Scotland Yard," he instructed. "The driver." "What are you thinking, Holmes?" I asked as we settled into the hansom. "I'm thinking we must locate Colonel Moran without delay," he replied. "Green's revelation about Elizabeth Marlowe provides a crucial piece of the puzzle. A half-English daughter would have the cultural knowledge to navigate both worlds, to execute a revenge plot decades in the making. But how to find her? After 45 years, the trail must be cold indeed. Perhaps." Holmes's eyes gleamed with the excitement of the chase. "But there is one person who might have kept track of her whereabouts, if only to protect himself. Colonel Moran," I concluded. "Precisely. And given his former connection to Moriarty, Moran has always maintained a network of informants and associates in London's underworld. If anyone would recognize this woman's hand in these murders, it would be he." The cab rattled onward through London's crowded streets, carrying us toward our next confrontation. I checked my revolver surreptitiously, ensuring it was loaded and ready. Something in Holmes's manner, a tightly coiled tension, suggested that matters were approaching their climax, and that before the day was out, we would come face to face with Cayley's avenger. Chapter 7. The Colonel's Gambit. "Moran is gone," Lestrade informed us grimly when we arrived at Scotland Yard. "His rooms in Conduit Street were found empty this morning, clothing and personal effects missing. His manservant claims he departed with a single valise after receiving a telegram last night." Holmes's face darkened. "The spider flees his web. Not a promising sign." "You think he's responsible for these murders?" Lestrade asked. "I think he fears becoming the next victim," Holmes replied, "though his flight suggests guilty knowledge at the very least. Did your men find anything of note in his rooms?" "Nothing immediately suspicious. Documents, correspondence, the usual personal effects. Though there was this—" Lestrade produced a small item wrapped in cloth. "Found hidden in a secret compartment of his desk." Holmes unwrapped the object carefully to reveal a music box identical to those found at the murder scenes, though this one was untainted by blood. "Moran's own society token," Holmes murmured, examining it closely. "He kept it all these years. Sentiment, or superstition, I wonder?" He opened the lid, and a delicate melody filled the room, a haunting tune with distinctly Eastern inflections. "The recognition signal," I said softly. Holmes nodded, closing the box. "Lestrade, I need your men to locate Dr. Thomas Green immediately. He may be in imminent danger." "The Harley Street physician? On what grounds?" "He is connected to both. Victims through events in colonial India," Holmes explained, deliberately vague, "and there is reason to believe he may be targeted next. Also, please telegraph all ports and railway stations with instructions to detain Colonel Moran, should he attempt to leave the country." After Lestrade departed to make the necessary arrangements, Holmes turned to me. We're missing something, Watson. Green's revelation about Elizabeth Marlowe and her daughter provides a potential suspect, but there are inconsistencies in this pattern of revenge. What inconsistencies? Consider, if our culprit is indeed Marlowe's daughter, why wait 45 years to exact vengeance? What triggered this now, beyond the temple excavation? And how did she obtain the victim's personal music boxes after so many decades? Before I could respond, a constable entered, with a telegram for Holmes. He tore it open, his expression growing grave as he read its contents. "It's from my network of informants," he said. "Colonel Moran was seen boarding a train to Liverpool, presumably to catch a steamer to America. But more importantly, they've identified a woman of interest, a Mrs. Helena Spencer, currently residing in Kensington. She arrived from India 3 months ago and has made inquiries about several individuals connected to colonial service in Bombay, including Sir Richard Harrington." "Marlowe's daughter?" I ventured. "It seems a strong possibility. Her age would be appropriate, mid-40s, and she is described as having mixed English and Indian features." Holmes checked his watch. "We should pay Mrs. Spencer a visit without delay." The address in Kensington proved to be an elegant townhouse in a fashionable district. As our cab approached, Holmes suddenly tensed, his keen eyes fixed on the building. "Something's wrong," he muttered. "The front door stands ajar, and there are scuff marks on the steps, signs of a struggle or hasty departure." With a sense of foreboding, we cautiously entered the house. The foyer appeared undisturbed, but as we ventured further inside, signs of violence became evident. A side table was overturned, a vase shattered on the expensive carpet. "Holmes," I whispered, drawing my revolver, "we should perhaps wait for Lestrade." "No time," he responded, moving swiftly toward the rear of the house. We found her in the study, a striking woman of mixed heritage, her dark hair streaked with silver, slumped over her desk with a dagger protruding from her back. The study itself had been thoroughly ransacked, drawers emptied and books pulled from shelves. "Too late," Holmes murmured, checking for signs of life, though the woman's stillness told its own story. Mrs. Spencer, or Marlowe, if that was indeed her true identity, has been silenced. As Holmes carefully examined the body and surrounding area, I noticed a familiar object on the floor near the victim's outstretched hand. A music box, knocked from the desk during the struggle. Unlike those at the previous crime scenes, this one was ornately carved from sandalwood rather than inlaid with mother-of-pearl. "Holmes, look here," I called. He crouched beside me, studying the box. "Indian craftsmanship, but not identical to the Lotus Society tokens. A similar mechanism, however." He gently opened it, and the same melody we had heard from Moran's box filled the air. She was one of them, I realized. A member of the Children of Cayley. So it would appear. Holmes was examining papers scattered around the desk. "And look at this, Watson." It was a photograph. A group of Indian men in traditional dress surrounding a seated English woman and a young girl of mixed heritage. The back bore an inscription: "Temple of Kali, Bombay, 1879. Elizabeth and Helena among the faithful." Helena, that would be our victim as a child, I observed. "Indeed." Holmes continued gathering papers from the floor, and these appeared to be notes on the surviving members of the Lotus Society. Addresses, daily habits, associates. This was undoubtedly our avenger, Watson. But who killed her? And why? A sudden noise from above made us both freeze. Footsteps moving hurriedly across the upper floor. "The killer may still be present," Holmes whispered. "Watson, cover the stairs." While I checked the rear of the house, I positioned myself at the foot of the staircase, revolver at the ready, while Holmes disappeared toward the kitchen. Moments later, I heard a crash from the garden, followed by Holmes's shout. I hesitated, torn between maintaining my position and assisting my friend. The decision was made for me when a figure suddenly appeared at the top of the stairs. A tall, Man with a hawk-like profile I instantly recognized. "Colonel Moran," I exclaimed, raising my revolver. "Lower your weapon, Dr. Watson," he replied calmly. "If I wished you harm, you would already be dead." Despite his advancing years, Sebastian Moran remained an imposing figure. His military bearing was undiminished, his cold eyes assessing me with predatory calculation. "You're a wanted man, Colonel," I said, keeping my revolver trained on him. "For crimes I did not commit," he replied, descending the stairs with measured steps. "Though I have committed many in my time, I assure you." A sound from the doorway announced Holmes's return, his own revolver now drawn. "Colonel Moran, I thought you were bound for Liverpool." "A necessary deception," Moran replied. "I knew my movements were being watched. I needed to investigate certain matters without interference." "Such as Mrs. Spencer's murder?" Holmes suggested coldly. Moran's laugh was without humor. "If I had killed her, Holmes, you would not have found her with a knife in her back. My methods, as you well know, are more distant. Then why are you here?" "The same reason as you, seeking answers." Moran's gaze swept over the ransacked study. "Though it appears someone has removed the most valuable evidence." "The golden collie statue," Holmes said, watching Moran closely. Something flickered in the colonel's eyes. "So you know about that?" "I know it was stolen from the temple in 1879, that it contained a document of significance, and that Sir Richard took possession of it. What I don't know is why it would motivate multiple murders now, after so many years." Moran seemed to reach a decision. "I propose a temporary alliance, Mr. Holmes. You seek a murderer. I seek to avoid becoming the next victim. Together, we may achieve both objectives. And why should I trust you, a known associate of Moriarty and confessed participant in the Temple massacre?" "Because, Holmes, only I know what that statue truly contained, and why Helena Marlowe has spent decades planning her revenge." Moran's expression was grim. "The murders of Harrington and Harcourt are merely preludes. What comes next threatens far more than the surviving members of the Lotus Society." From the street came the sound of police whistles. Holmes and I exchanged glances, knowing Lestrade and his men must have arrived in response to our earlier request for backup. "You have 1 minute to convince me, Colonel," Holmes said. "After that, I turn you over to Scotland Yard." Moran nodded curtly. "Very well." The document hidden in the Cayley statue was not merely religious in nature. It contained evidence of British government complicity in the systematic looting of Indian temples, authorized at the highest levels. Its exposure would spark outrage throughout the colonies and potentially trigger widespread rebellion. Hence the insurance Sir Richard believed it provided, Holmes mused. Precisely. And now, with Helena dead, the statue and document have fallen into unknown hands, hands that may use them for far more destructive purposes than mere personal vengeance. Chapter 8. A Dangerous Alliance. The arrival of Lestrade and his men forced an immediate decision. With a swift glance at me, Holmes gestured toward the garden door. "You have 30 seconds to disappear, Colonel," he said in a low voice. "I expect you at Baker Street at midnight. Come alone and prepared to provide all details. If you fail to appear, I will personally ensure that Scotland Yard hunts you to the ends of the earth." Moran's thin lips curved in a sardonic smile. "Until midnight, then." With remarkable agility for a man of his years, he slipped through the door and vanished into the garden just as Lestrade's footsteps sounded in the hallway. "Holmes, Dr. Watson," the inspector called. "Are you in here? We saw the door open and, good heavens." Lestrade stopped short at the sight of Helena Spencer's body, still slumped over her desk. His experienced eye took in the scene of struggle, the scattered papers, and the sandalwood music box. "Another murder," he muttered grimly. "And another music box. Who is she?" "Helena Spencer recently arrived from India," Holmes replied, carefully omitting her connection to Elizabeth Marlowe. I believe she was killed to prevent her from sharing information about our current case, while Lestrade organized his men. To secure the scene and search the house, Holmes quietly gathered several documents that had fallen behind the desk, out of sight of casual observers. He slipped these into his coat pocket with a subtle nod to me indicating their importance. The killer likely escaped through the garden, Holmes told Lestrade. I heard someone fleeing as we entered. Too late to give chase, unfortunately. It was not a complete lie, merely a strategic omission of Moran's identity. I found myself conflicted about Holmes's decision to release the colonel, but trusted my friend's judgment. If anyone could extract valuable information from Moran while maintaining the upper hand, it was Sherlock Holmes. After providing our statements to Lestrade and promising to return the following day for any further questions, we departed. Holmes maintained a thoughtful silence until we were safely inside a hansom cab bound for Baker Street. You took a considerable risk letting Moran go, I observed once we were underway. The greater risk would be allowing him to be arrested before we learn what he knows, Holmes replied. Moran is many things, assassin, poacher, card sharp, but he is no fool. If what he claims about that document is true, we may be dealing with a conspiracy far larger than a simple revenge plot. Do you believe him then? Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin, his characteristic pose when deep in thought. Partially. His concern seemed genuine, and his presence at Helena Spencer's house suggests he was investigating independently. But Moran is a master of deception, trained under Moriarty himself. We must proceed with extreme caution. Back at Baker Street, Holmes immediately immersed himself in the papers he had retrieved from Helena Spencer's study. I made tea and settled in to assist, though my mind kept returning to the approaching midnight meeting with one of London's most dangerous men. "These are fascinating, Watson," Holmes declared after an hour of careful examination. Mrs. Spencer maintained meticulous records of the Lotus Society members' activities over decades. Notes on their businesses, associates, daily habits, even floor plans of their homes. "The preparation of a patient assassin," I remarked. "Indeed. But look at this." He handed me a yellowed document. A letter from Elizabeth Marlowe to her daughter, dated just before the Temple massacre. The letter was written in a flowing feminine hand, its contents both touching and disturbing. "My dearest Helena, if you are reading this, I have not returned from the Temple as promised. Trust in Arjun to keep you safe until arrangements can be made for your passage to England. The men I warned you about, those who call themselves the Lotus Society, have been making inquiries about the Temple's treasures. I fear their greed knows no bounds. Should any harm befall me, know that my journals contain the truth of all that has transpired here. The British authorities will never admit their complicity, but the evidence exists and must be preserved. Remember, always that you are a child of two worlds. Never be ashamed of either heritage, for therein lies your strength, with eternal love, your mother." "She knew they were coming," I said softly, "and prepared accordingly." Holmes showed me another document, a page torn from what appeared to be a personal journal. Elizabeth Marlowe was more than a scholar of Hindu mysticism. She was documenting the systematic looting of religious treasures from temples throughout India, with the tacit approval of colonial officials, thus providing motive for the British authorities to silence her, I concluded. Precisely. The official report claiming the temple housed dangerous Thuggee cultists was a convenient fiction to justify the massacre. Elizabeth Marlowe wasn't killed because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was the primary target. This revelation cast the entire case in a new light. What had seemed a straightforward tale of colonial greed and subsequent revenge now took on political dimensions far beyond the personal vendetta of Helena Spencer. As midnight approached, Holmes checked his revolver and positioned me in the darkened alcove near the door, where I would be hidden from immediate view should Moran harbor treacherous intentions. The clock had just completed its 12 chimes when we heard footsteps on the stairs. Quiet, measured treads that spoke of military discipline. Colonel Moran entered without knocking, his hawkish features thrown into sharp relief by the lamplight. He carried a small valise and was dressed for travel, his overcoat buttoned against the November chill. "You came alone?" Holmes inquired, remaining seated by the fire. "As agreed." Moran's eyes scanned the room, undoubtedly noting my absence, though. I suspected he was too shrewd to believe I wasn't nearby. "Shall we dispense with pleasantries, Holmes? Time is of the essence." "Indeed. You claimed the document hidden in the Kali statue could trigger rebellion in the colonies. Elaborate." Moran removed his coat and took the chair opposite Holmes. "The East India Company and later the Colonial Office authorized a systematic program of cultural acquisition, a euphemism for temple looting. Certain religious artifacts were deemed too influential, too central to native identities. Their removal was strategic, breaking the spirit of resistance by destroying cultural touchstones. And Elizabeth Marlowe discovered this program. A flicker of surprise crossed Moran's face. "You've been thorough in your investigation." "Yes." She uncovered communications between London and Bombay authorizing these acquisitions. She had compiled evidence, witness testimonies, official documents, enough to prove government complicity at the highest levels, which she hid in the golden Kali statue, Holmes concluded. A clever hiding place. The statue itself was valuable, enough that whoever took it would keep it intact. Yet its religious nature meant it would never be casually displayed or examined too closely by British authorities. Moran leaned forward. "But here's what you don't yet understand, Holmes. Helena Spencer was not working alone." "The children of Kali," I said, stepping from my hiding place, revolver still in hand. Moran nodded without turning. "Dr. Watson, I wondered where you were lurking." "Yes." The children of Kali began as a small group of temple survivors and their descendants, dedicated to reclaiming stolen artifacts and exposing colonial atrocities. But over decades, it evolved into something far more dangerous, a network with connections to revolutionary elements throughout India and sympathizers here in England. "And Helena's murder," Holmes pressed. "Internal conflict, I believe. The original mission, personal vengeance against the Lotus Society members, has been superseded by political aims. Helena's death suggests a schism within the organization. Someone wants that document not to expose past wrongs, but to incite future violence." "Who?" I demanded. Moran's expression darkened. "That's what I've been trying to discover. I believe the current leader is someone within British society, someone with access to power but with radical sympathies. They've been eliminating loose ends, Harrington, Harcourt, and now Helena herself." "And Dr. Green?" Holmes inquired. "Have you had any contact with him?" "Not in years. Is he still alive?" "For the moment. We warned him to leave London, but he refused." Moran nodded grimly. "Then he will likely be dead by morning, unless your Inspector Lestrade has provided protection. But I did not come merely to share theories, Holmes. I came because I believe I know where to find the statue." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Indeed?" "Yes, and I propose we retrieve it together. Tonight. Before whoever has orchestrated these murders can use it to set fire to the Empire." Chapter 9. The Temple's Shadow. "Where exactly do you believe this statue is located?" Holmes asked, eyeing Moran with cautious interest. "In the one place none of us thought to look, hidden in plain sight at the British Museum." Moran opened his valise and withdrew a folded newspaper clipping. This appeared in the Times 3 months ago, announcing a new exhibition of colonial antiquities, recently transferred from private collections. Holmes examined the clipping, which featured an illustration of several Indian artifacts. "And you believe the Kali statue is among these items?" "I'm certain of it. When Sir Richard realized he was being targeted, he didn't flee or seek police protection. He donated the statue to the museum through an intermediary. A clever move. He removed the evidence from his possession while ensuring it remained intact and accessible. If that's the case, why haven't the children of Kali simply visited the exhibition to confirm its presence? I asked. The statue isn't on public display, Moran explained. According to my sources, it's being held in the museum's restoration department pending authentication and conservation assessment. Holmes rose briskly. Then we must move quickly. Watson, bring your revolver and medical bag. Colonel, I presume you're similarly armed? Moran patted his coat pocket with a grim smile. Always. We departed Baker Street through the back entrance, taking precautions to ensure we weren't followed. The night had grown colder, with a biting wind that cut through our coats and drove the few remaining pedestrians from the streets. London after. Midnight held a particular stillness, broken only by the occasional hansom cab or police patrol. How do you propose we enter the museum at this hour? I asked as we approached the imposing neoclassical facade of the British Museum, dark and forbidding against the night sky. I have maintained certain professional connections from my previous line of work, Moran replied. One of the night. Watchman is a former soldier who served under me in Afghanistan. He owes me his life and knows better than to ask questions. True to his word, Moran led us to a service entrance where an elderly man in a watchman's uniform waited. No words were exchanged. The guard simply nodded in recognition and unlocked the door, holding up 5 fingers to indicate our time limit. 5 minutes to disable the alarm system, Moran whispered as we entered. Then we proceed to the restoration department in the East Wing. The museum after hours was an eerie place, filled with shadows that transformed familiar exhibits into looming specters. Our footsteps echoed on the marble floors despite our attempts at silence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the ancient artifacts watched our passage with stone eyes. Following Moran's lead, we navigated the labyrinthine corridors until we reached a door marked Conservation Authorized Personnel Only. Holmes made quick work of the lock with his picklocks, and we slipped inside. The restoration department consisted of several interconnected workrooms filled with tables bearing artifacts in various stages of cleaning and repair. Overhead lamps, when activated by Holmes, cast pools of light that revealed an Aladdin's cave of treasures. Egyptian canopic jars, Greek pottery, Roman glassware, and a significant collection of Indian items. There, Moran said, pointing to a work table in the corner. That must be it. The statue was smaller than I had imagined, perhaps 15 inches tall, but exquisitely crafted in solid gold. The figure of Kali, with her multiple arms and fearsome expression, gleamed dully in the lamplight, her surface partially obscured by decades of tarnish. A small card beside it identified it as Hindu deity figure, Bombay region, circa 14th century, awaiting authentication. Holmes examined it carefully without touching. Fascinating craftsmanship. But where would one hide documents within such a solid piece? The base is separate, Moran explained, demonstrating with careful hands. It unscrews counterclockwise, a design feature known only to the temple priests and, later, to us. With practiced ease, he twisted the base of the statue. After initial resistance, it turned smoothly, revealing a hollow compartment within. Moran upended the statue, and a tightly rolled parchment slid out into his palm. The temple's secret, he murmured, an uncharacteristic reverence in his voice. Untouched for 45 years. Before he could unroll it, Holmes intervened. I believe that should remain sealed until we are in a more secure location, Colonel. Moran hesitated, then nodded curtly, handing the document to Holmes, who tucked it safely inside his coat. You're right, of course. We should depart before... A soft click from the doorway interrupted him. The unmistakable sound of a revolver being cocked. Before you're discovered? Came a refined voice from the shadows. I'm afraid you're too late for that, gentlemen. We turned to find a familiar figure standing in the doorway. Dr. Thomas Green, looking considerably less frail than when we had visited him that morning. His unsteady hands had steadied remarkably, now holding a revolver with practiced confidence. "Green," Moran growled. "I should have known." "Indeed you should have, Sebastian." Green stepped fully into the light, revealing a changed man. Gone was the trembling, whiskey-soaked physician. In his place stood a calculating figure with cold determination in his eyes. "Though you were always the least perceptive of our little brotherhood. You orchestrated it all," Holmes said, his voice betraying no surprise, merely confirmation of a deduction already formed. "The murders of Sir Richard and Lord Harcourt, Helena Spencer as well." Green smiled thinly. "Very good, Mr. Holmes, though I expected no less from a man of your reputation." "But why?" I asked, struggling to reconcile the seemingly terrified doctor from Harley Street with this composed killer. "You were one of them, a member of the Lotus Society." "The least of them," Green replied bitterly. "Always the outsider, the one who stayed behind while they committed their grand theft and massacre. They took the treasure and the glory, while I received a pittance for my role. Richard and Cedric built fortunes on blood money, while I scraped by in my modest practice." "So this was about money?" Holmes asked, though his tone suggested he knew otherwise. Green laughed, a harsh, cold sound. "It began that way, perhaps, but over the years I found new purpose, new allies who shared my growing disgust with colonial excess and exploitation. The children of Cali," Holmes concluded. "You joined them, betraying your former associates." "I did more than join them, Mr. Holmes. After Helena's mother died, after Moran put a bullet through Elizabeth Marlowe's heart, I helped arrange for Helena to be educated in England. I guided her, mentored her, and eventually helped her transform her personal vendetta into a political movement. And then you killed her when she became inconvenient," Moran spat. Green's expression hardened. "Helena became sentimental. She wanted justice, but balked at the greater vision. The documents hidden in that statue aren't merely evidence of past crimes. They're a weapon that could ignite revolution throughout the colonies. She feared the bloodshed that would follow. So you silenced her and continued with your plan," Holmes said, "using the music boxes as both signature and misdirection, leading us to believe the murders were purely acts of revenge by Helena." "The music boxes were a particularly satisfying touch," Green admitted. "Symbols of their corruption, turned into harbingers of their deaths. Poetic, wouldn't you agree?" As Green spoke, I noticed Holmes's posture shift subtly, a barely perceptible tensing that I recognized from countless dangerous situations. He was preparing to act. "And what happens now, Doctor?" Holmes asked, his voice deliberately casual. "You cannot hope to escape after murdering 3 people, with 3 witnesses to your confession." Green's smile was chilling. "You misunderstand, Mr. Holmes. I do not intend to escape. By dawn, this exhibition will be ash, and the British Museum, itself a smoking ruin. The documents will be published simultaneously in newspapers across India. And you 3, the great detective, his loyal companion, and the notorious Colonel Moran, will be found dead among the debris, victims of a tragic accident while attempting to steal colonial treasures." He withdrew from his pocket a small metal object, a pocket watch, it seemed at first glance, but with an ominous-looking mechanism attached to its face. "A detonator," Moran murmured. "Military grade. Where did you get that?" "I have powerful friends, Sebastian. The world is changing, and the British Empire's days are numbered. This—" He gestured around at the artifacts. "This pillaging of cultures will be remembered as their greatest shame." As Green's attention momentarily shifted to his device, Holmes caught my eye with the briefest of glances. I understood his silent communication perfectly. "Be ready." "Before we die," Holmes said calmly, "I wonder if you might satisfy my professional curiosity on one point, Doctor. The blood on the music boxes. Was it the victim's own?" Green looked up, momentarily, diverted by the question, and in that instant Holmes acted. Chapter 10. The Goddess Speaks. In one fluid motion, Holmes swept an ancient ceramic vase from a nearby table, hurling it toward Green's head. The doctor ducked instinctively, his concentration broken, and his aim disrupted. In that crucial moment, Moran lunged forward with the predatory speed that had made him notorious in 3 continents, grappling for the revolver. As the 2 men struggled, I rushed to assist, only to be thrown back by the force of their collision, with a display case, which shattered in a cascade of glass and ancient fragments. Holmes, meanwhile, had circled behind, attempting to secure the detonator that Green still clutched in his left hand. "Watson!" Holmes called sharply. "The lights!" Understanding. Immediately, I scrambled to the wall switch and plunged the room into darkness. The sudden blackness was disorienting, but it worked to our advantage. Green was unfamiliar with the room's layout, while we had observed it carefully upon entry. A shot rang out, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating Moran and Green locked. In combat, the revolver now pointed at the ceiling. The bullet struck an overhead pipe, releasing a hissing stream of gas that added to the chaos. I fumbled in my pocket for matches, struck one, and located a lantern on a far workbench. With this modest illumination, I could make out Holmes wresting the detonator from Green's grasp, while Moran pinned the doctor against the wall, his forearm pressed against Green's throat. "The revolver, Colonel!" Holmes shouted. Moran wrenched the weapon from Green's weakening grip and stepped back, training it on the doctor's chest. "Give me one reason I shouldn't kill you now, Thomas," he growled, using Green's Christian name with cold familiarity. Green, gasping for breath but still defiant, managed a ragged laugh. "Kill me if you wish, Sebastian. It changes nothing. The wheels are already in motion. My death will only hasten the reckoning." Holmes, having secured the detonator, examined it closely in the lantern light. "Ingenious device, though I believe you've overestimated its capabilities, Doctor. This would certainly damage this wing of the museum, but it lacks the power to destroy the entire building." "That was merely the primer," Green replied with a chilling smile. "There are other devices placed throughout the museum, all set to detonate at dawn unless I return to deactivate them." "You're bluffing," Moran said, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Perhaps. Are you willing to risk the lives of everyone within 100 yards to test that theory?" Green's composure had returned despite his precarious position. "We appear to be at an impasse, gentlemen." A tense silence fell as we considered our options. The escaping gas had created an additional hazard. Any spark could ignite it, making use of firearms increasingly dangerous. The lantern itself posed a risk if handled carelessly. "I propose a temporary truce," Holmes said finally. "Dr. Green will lead us to the other devices and deactivate them. In exchange, he will be permitted to surrender to the proper authorities rather than meeting a more immediate justice at Colonel Moran's hands." Green's eyes narrowed. "And the document from the statue will be turned over to Scotland Yard as evidence of both historical crimes and your current ones," Holmes replied firmly. "Unacceptable," Green spat. "Those documents must reach the public. Their contents will be made known through appropriate legal channels," Holmes countered. "Justice, Dr. Green, not vengeance, and certainly not indiscriminate bloodshed." I could see Green calculating his options, which were admittedly few. Moran's revolver remained unwavering, and the former Army colonel's expression suggested he would welcome any excuse to use it. "Very well," Green conceded finally. "I'll deactivate the devices, but I want your word, Holmes, that the full truth will come to light, not some sanitized version that protects the powerful." "You have it," Holmes affirmed. "Watson is a meticulous chronicler. The facts will be recorded faithfully. With wary caution, we allowed Green to lead us through the darkened museum corridors. He moved with surprising confidence for a man who had spent his career in Harley Street, navigating the labyrinthine passages with the familiarity of one who had studied the layout extensively. "How long have you been planning this, Green?" Moran asked as we descended a narrow service staircase to the Egyptian wing. "In some form? Decades." Green's voice echoed in the confined space. "After Elizabeth's death, something broke in me. I continued my practice, maintained my respectable facade, but inside—" He paused at a display case containing a sarcophagus. "Inside, I became a revolutionary." He reached beneath the case and carefully withdrew a metal box with wires protruding. From its casing, similar to the detonator Holmes now carried, but larger and more complex. "Helena found me 15 years ago," he continued, his fingers working deftly to disarm the device. "She had traced the Lotus Society members through her mother's journals and sought my help, believing I was merely a peripheral figure. I saw in her the perfect instrument for justice, or what I then conceived as justice. And when she balked at mass murder, you eliminated her," Holmes observed coldly. Green's hands paused momentarily. "I regretted that necessity. Helena was like a daughter to me, but she would have exposed our plans prematurely when she learned the full scope of what we intended." The device deactivated with an audible click. Green straightened. 3 more to go. As we proceeded through the silent galleries, past artifacts looted from civilizations around the world, I found myself reflecting on the strange parallels between Green and the very colonial system he despised. Both justified violence in service of their ideals. Both claimed to know what was best for others. The second and third devices were concealed within the Greek and Roman collections, respectively. As Green disarmed the third, Holmes inquired about a detail that had been troubling me as well. "The music boxes, Doctor. How did you obtain them after all these years?" Green smiled thinly. "Sir Richard still had his, of course, a souvenir of his glory days. Lord Harcourt's required more effort. I tracked it through 3 owners before purchasing it anonymously at auction last year. Finding them seemed poetically appropriate for what I had planned." "And Moran's?" I asked, glancing at the colonel, who had maintained a vigilant watch over Green throughout our macabre tour. "I never located it," Green admitted. "Though it hardly matters now. The final device was hidden within the newest exhibition. Ironically, a display on the Jewels of Empire, featuring diamonds from India, gold from Africa, and jade from China." As Green worked to disarm it, Holmes positioned himself to observe the doctor's technique more closely. "You mentioned the music boxes were soaked with their own blood," Holmes reminded him. "What did you mean by that?" Green's lips twisted in a grim smile. "Not literally their blood, Mr. Holmes. The blood of those who died at the temple. I obtained it from Helena. She had preserved a vial of soil from the massacre site, saturated with the blood of her mother and the priests. A symbolic connection between their crimes and their punishment. With the final device neutralized, we escorted Green back toward the museum entrance. Dawn was approaching, its first gray light visible through the high windows. Soon the first staff would arrive, unaware of how close they had come to disaster. "What happens now?" Green asked, his earlier defiance fading into resigned exhaustion. "Now, Dr. Green, you face justice for 3 murders," Holmes replied. "Though I suspect your trial may reveal truths that many in power would prefer remained buried." As we neared the entrance hall, Green suddenly stopped, turning to face the Kali statue that Holmes carried carefully in one hand. "She was right. All along, you know," he said softly. "Elizabeth. She believed Kali wasn't a goddess of destruction, but of time and change. The empire will fall of its own weight, she used to say, without need for bloodshed." I should have listened. A noise from the entrance hall alerted us to the arrival of the morning staff. We had run out of time for philosophical reflections. "Colonel," Holmes said quietly, "I believe this is where we must part ways. Dr. Green and the statue will come with Watson and me to Scotland Yard. I suggest you make yourself scarce until this matter is concluded." Moran hesitated, then nodded, curtly. With a final venomous glance at Green, he melted away into the shadows of a side corridor, a skill that had served him well in his checkered career. As the museum came to life around us, I could not help but feel we stood at the intersection of past and future. The looted treasures of empire surrounding us, the evidence of historical crimes in Holmes's pocket, and beside us, a murderer who had nearly triggered events that might have changed the course of history. The case of the blood-stained music box was reaching its conclusion, but the echoes of its revelations would resonate far beyond the confines of a single mystery. Chapter 11. Justice and Revelations. The events that followed our dramatic night at the British Museum unfolded with remarkable swiftness. Inspector Lestrade, initially skeptical of our account, became a staunch ally once the evidence was laid before him, particularly the documents from the Kali statue, which proved as incendiary as Green had claimed. "This goes beyond my jurisdiction, Mr. Holmes," Lestrade admitted as he examined the faded parchments in his office at Scotland Yard. "Colonial Office, Foreign Department, even the Home Secretary may become involved." "I anticipate as much," Holmes replied calmly, "which is why I've taken the liberty of making copies of these documents, now secured in multiple locations. Should there be any attempt to suppress this evidence, it will promptly find its way to the press." I marveled at Holmes's foresight. He had evidently anticipated pressure from powerful interests to bury the Temple massacre once again. Dr. Green was held in a secure cell, separated from other prisoners. His demeanor had shifted to one of quiet resignation, though he maintained an unsettling air of satisfaction when informed that the documents would indeed become part of the official record. "What will happen to Miss Harrington now?" I asked Holmes as we departed Scotland Yard. The young woman had been officially cleared of all suspicion in her uncle's murder, though she remained unaware of the full circumstances surrounding his death. "She is fortunately free to rebuild her life," Holmes replied. "Though I suspect the revelations about her uncle's past may prove challenging. I've arranged for her inheritance to be released without delay. Sir Richard's ill-gotten gains may at least provide her with financial security." A telegram awaited us upon our return to Baker Street. A message from Holmes's network of informants reporting that Colonel Moran had been observed boarding a steamer bound for America, this time genuinely departing English shores. "Do you think we should have apprehended him?" I asked, not entirely comfortable with our decision to allow the former assassin to escape justice for his past crimes. Holmes considered this as he filled his pipe. Moran's crimes in India would be nearly impossible to prove after so many years, especially given the colonial authorities' complicity in the cover-up. As for his later activities with Moriarty, those waters are muddied by his subsequent cooperation with us in this case. "Justice, Watson, sometimes requires compromise." I was not entirely satisfied with this pragmatic view, but I acknowledged the complexities of the situation. "And what of the music boxes? Will they be returned to their rightful owners?" "They have no rightful owners," Holmes replied. "They were symbols of a corrupt brotherhood, stained now with the blood of victims long silenced. They will be preserved as evidence, then likely consigned to some museum archive, perhaps more fitting company than they've kept these past decades." The following day brought news that Professor James Harrington had died peacefully in his sleep at Oxford. A natural death, the coroner concluded, though I wondered if the strain of recent events and the resurrection of painful memories had hastened his end. That afternoon, we received an unexpected visitor at Baker Street. Miss Eleanor Harrington, dressed in mourning but carrying herself with newfound confidence. She had been informed of Dr. Green's arrest and the clearing of her name, though the authorities had shared only the barest details of the case. "Mr. Holmes," she said as she settled into the chair by our fire, "I understand from Inspector Lestrade that I owe you my freedom, perhaps even my life. Yet I feel there is much I still don't know about my uncle's death and the events surrounding it." Holmes studied her thoughtfully before responding. "Some truths are difficult to bear, Miss Harrington. Are you certain you wish to know all?" "I have spent my life in the shadow of half-truths and evasions, Mr. Holmes. Whatever the cost, I prefer the clarity of complete knowledge." With careful sensitivity, Holmes related the substance of our investigation: the Lotus Society, the Temple, massacre, the Golden Collie statue, and Dr. Green's decades-long plot for revenge. He omitted only the most graphic details, though he did not shield her from the fundamental truth of her uncle's participation in the colonial atrocity. Eleanor received this information with remarkable composure, though I noted her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them in her lap. "I always sensed there was something dark in Uncle Richard's past," she said when Holmes concluded. "The nightmares, his obsession with security, his strange attachment to Indian artifacts that he simultaneously revered and seemed to fear. It all makes a terrible kind of sense now." "Your uncle's actions in India were unconscionable," Holmes acknowledged, "but it may offer some small consolation to know that he was haunted by them. According to his diary, he made anonymous donations to several Indian educational institutions in his later years." "Conscience money," Eleanor murmured. "Too little, too late." She straightened her shoulders. "What will happen to Dr. Green?" "He will stand trial for 3 murders. Given the evidence, his conviction is certain. Whether he will hang or be confined to an asylum depends largely on how the court views his mental state." "And the documents? Will the truth about the temple massacre become public knowledge?" Holmes exchanged a glance with me before answering. "The evidence has been submitted to the proper authorities. Its full disclosure may take time, as it implicates individuals at the highest levels of colonial administration. But I have taken measures to ensure it cannot be entirely suppressed." Eleanor nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. "Then I have a decision to make, gentlemen. My uncle's estate, once released to me, represents a considerable fortune, built, as you've shown me, on the suffering of others. I cannot in good conscience simply enjoy such tainted wealth." "What do you propose to do?" I asked. "I intend to establish a foundation for the preservation and study of Indian cultural heritage, and to fund educational opportunities for Indian scholars in England. It seems a fitting way to transform my uncle's legacy into something that begins to address the injustices in which he participated." Holmes nodded approvingly. "A commendable decision, Miss Harrington. Your mother would have been proud." As Eleanor prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "There is one more thing that troubles me, Mr. Holmes. You mentioned music boxes found at the murder scenes, tokens of this Lotus Society. I recalled something that may be significant. The night before his death, I heard music coming from my uncle's study, a strange, haunting melody unlike anything in his usual collection. Could that have been—" "The music box, yes," Holmes confirmed. "Dr. Green likely activated it as a psychological torment before the murder, forcing Sir Richard to confront the symbol of his past crimes in his final moments." Eleanor shuddered. "How terrible. Yet there's a certain symmetry to it, isn't there? The very emblem of their corrupt brotherhood becoming the harbinger of their doom." After she departed, Holmes and I sat in contemplative silence for some time, each absorbed in our own reflections on the case. Outside, the persistent November fog had finally begun to lift, allowing weak sunshine to filter through our windows. "You know, Watson," Holmes said finally, breaking the silence, "this case represents something of a moral conundrum. Green's methods were unquestionably criminal, yet the truths he sought to expose deserved revelation. One wonders if justice would ever have been served without his terrible catalyst." "Surely there are better paths to justice than murder," I protested. "Indeed there are, and that is why Green must face consequences for his actions. but history is rarely shaped by moderate means alone. Holmes rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the London street below. The music boxes have fallen, silent now, but their echoes will resonate for years to come. I could not help but agree. The case of the blood-stained music box had begun as a seemingly straightforward murder investigation, only to unravel threads of colonial exploitation, decades-old vengeance, and political conspiracy. As with so many of Holmes's cases, the true mystery lay not in the mechanics of the crimes, but in the complex web of human motivations that had spawned them. The final music box remains unaccounted for, I noted. Moran's? Yes, Holmes replied with a slight smile. I suspect it travels with him to America, perhaps as a reminder, perhaps as insurance. Some threads must remain loose, Watson. It is the nature of our imperfect world. He turned from the window, his moment of philosophical musing complete. Now, I believe Mrs. Hudson mentioned something about lunch. After our nocturnal adventures at the museum, I find myself quite famished. And so concluded the strange affair of the blood-stained music box, with justice served if imperfectly, and long-buried truths finally brought to light. Chapter 12. The final note. 3 months passed since the resolution of the case that I had tentatively titled The Enigma of the Blood-Stained Music Box in my private journals. Winter had released its grip on London, giving way to the first tentative signs of spring. Holmes had immersed himself in several minor cases, counterfeiting schemes and blackmail attempts that, while intellectually stimulating, lacked the profound moral complexity of our encounter with Dr. Green and the legacy of the Lotus Society. The trial of Dr. Thomas Green had concluded the previous week, resulting in his conviction on 3 counts of murder. The judge, acknowledging the exceptional circumstances and Green's cooperation in preventing the museum bombing, had spared him the gallows. Instead, he was sentenced to life imprisonment at Broadmoor Criminal Lunatic Asylum, a fate that Green accepted with the same eerie calm he had displayed throughout the proceedings. Most remarkable about the trial was what remained unspoken. The documents from the Kali statue were entered into evidence, but sealed by judicial order, with only limited references to their contents permitted in open court. Nevertheless, rumors circulated in political circles and the press. Questions were raised in Parliament about colonial practices in India. 3 senior officials in the colonial office tendered their resignations for personal reasons. The wheels of change turned slowly, but they turned nonetheless. I was updating my notes on the case one evening when Holmes, who had been reading the evening papers by the fire, suddenly uttered an exclamation of interest. Watson, listen to this item from the international news section. Colonel Sebastian Moran, formerly of the Indian Army and once a notable figure in London society, was found dead in his New York hotel room yesterday. Police suspect foul play, noting that the room showed signs of a struggle. Most peculiar was the presence of a small mechanical music box found open on the bedside table. Authorities are investigating possible connections to organized crime. I lowered my pen, a chill running through me despite the warmth of the fire. The final member of the Lotus Society, I murmured. Indeed. Holmes folded the newspaper thoughtfully. It would seem our case has an epilogue written across the Atlantic. Do you think it was the children of Kali? Some associate of Helena Spencer's carrying on her work? Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin. Possibly. Or perhaps some other party with an interest in silencing Moran permanently. He accumulated many enemies during his checkered career. He paused. There is also the matter of his own music, box, which was never accounted for. You don't think that Moran's own token was used in his murder? It would complete the pattern most satisfyingly from a certain perspective. Poetic justice, as Green might have called it. A knock at our door interrupted this grim speculation. Mrs. Hudson entered bearing a small package. This just arrived for you, Mr. Holmes. A boy delivered it, said there was no reply needed. The package was roughly the size of a cigar box, wrapped, in brown paper and bound with twine. No return address was provided, merely Holmes's name and our Baker Street address in a flowing feminine hand. Holmes examined it carefully before cutting the twine with his pocket knife. The paper fell away to reveal a wooden box, a sandalwood music box of Indian craftsmanship, similar to the one we had found in Helena Spencer's study. "Careful, Holmes," I cautioned, recalling the deadly devices Green had planted at the museum. With characteristic composure, Holmes opened the lid. The melody that emerged was the same haunting tune we had heard from Moran's box. The recognition, Signal of the Lotus Society. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay a folded note and a small object wrapped in silk. Holmes unfolded the note first and read aloud, "Mr. Holmes, by the time you receive this, I will have left England forever. Helena Spencer was my mentor and friend. We worked together for years within the Children of Cali. Her death at Green's hands was a betrayal that cannot be forgiven, though justice has been partially served through your efforts." The enclosed item was recovered from Colonel Moran's possession. It completes the circle and returns to its origins. The music has ended for the Lotus Society, but the echoes of truth cannot be silenced. With respect and gratitude, Anya Sharma. Holmes carefully unwrapped the silk parcel to reveal a small golden figurine, a detailed miniature of the goddess Kali, perhaps 2 inches in height. "A piece broken from the original statue?" I suggested. "I think not," Holmes replied, examining it closely. "This appears to be much older, possibly the template for the larger statue. Note the exquisite craftsmanship and the wear patterns consistent with centuries of ritual handling." So this was the original temple artifact, I realized. The one that inspired the golden statue created to house the documents. Precisely. A sacred object looted during the massacre, possessed by Moran all these years, perhaps as a trophy, perhaps as a talisman. Holmes turned the figurine in the light, and now returned to us by this mysterious Anya Sharma, evidently another member of the Children of Kali, and likely the one responsible for Moran's death. Should we inform Lestrade? This is evidence of a murder, even if it occurred in America. Holmes considered this question carefully before responding. "I believe in this instance, Watson, we serve justice better by discretion. The authorities in New York will investigate Moran's death according to their procedures. This figurine and note would raise far more questions than they would answer, potentially reopening wounds that have just begun to heal." He placed the tiny Kali figure carefully on our mantelpiece. "Some justice operates beyond the reach of courts and prisons. I do not condone vigilantism, but I cannot bring myself to pursue this Anya Sharma with any great enthusiasm." I found myself in reluctant agreement. After all we had learned about the Temple massacre and its aftermath, Moran's fate seemed almost inevitable, the final note in a tragedy composed decades ago. The next morning brought another visitor to Baker Street, Eleanor Harrington, looking considerably more at peace than when we had last seen her. She had come to inform us that her Foundation for Indian Cultural Heritage had been officially established, with an eminent scholar of Hindu art as its director, and ambitious plans for cultural exchange programs. "I've also commissioned a memorial at the site of the temple in Bombay," she told us, "not mentioning my uncle by name, of course, but acknowledging the tragic events that occurred there and honoring those who died." "A commendable gesture," Holmes remarked. "Reconciliation requires acknowledgement of past wrongs." Before departing, Eleanor noticed the small golden Kali on our mantelpiece. "What a beautiful piece," she commented. "It reminds me of stories my mother used to tell about Kali as destroyer of evil and protector of the innocent. Despite my uncle's fears, she always said there was wisdom in these ancient beliefs." After she left, Holmes picked up his violin and began to play. Not one of his usual vigorous compositions, but a gentle meditative piece that seemed to complement the spring sunshine now streaming through our windows. "A remarkable case, Watson," he said during a pause in his playing. "It has taught me much about the long shadows cast by historical injustice and the complex nature of retribution." "Oh, and about music boxes," I added with a wry smile. Holmes returned the smile. "Indeed, innocent objects transformed into vessels of vengeance. Though I suspect neither of us will regard such devices with quite the same appreciation in future." As the final notes of his improvisation faded, I reflected that the case of the blood-stained music box had ended as it began, with silence following melody, and with justice, however imperfect, finally served.